All right, today is actually our last section in chapter 1. We're going to be talking about midpoint and distance. So first thing you're going to start with is your midpoint formula. So for midpoint formula, you add your x coordinates, cut it in half, add your y coordinates, cut it in half. This is an ordered pair that you get, so you should be able to graph your midpoint. It's an ordered pair that you're going to get out of this. So for the first example, it says find the coordinates of the midpoint. So they want us to find the midpoint of EF when the endpoints are E and F, and they gave us those midpoint or those endpoints. So we're going to use our formula. We're going to add our x coordinates. So here's one of our x coordinates, and here's another. Doesn't matter which way you add them. So -2 plus 5, and then we're going to cut it in half. That'll be my x coordinate. We're going to do the same thing for my y's. We have a 3 and a -3. Doesn't matter how you add them, 3 plus -3, and we're going to cut it in half. So again, add your x's, chop it in half, add your y's, chop it in half. So here, -2 plus 5 is 3 over 2. We're just going to leave it as 3 over 2. You could have put 1.5 as well. I would steer clear of mixed numbers. Don't write this as 1 and 1/2. So either leave it as 3/2 or 1.5. 3 plus -3 is 0. 0 divided by 2 is still 0. So those would be the coordinates of our midpoint. Moving on. Now this one's a little bit different. This says S is the midpoint of RT. So we have line segment RT, R to T, and you know S is in the middle. And it tells you R, and you could graph this on graph paper, but I'm not going to go that far. And S has the coordinates of -1, 1. We don't know T, so we're just going to say it has an x coordinate and a y coordinate. Well, these are what you want to find. So you're still using your midpoint formula, right? Add your x's, chop it in half, but you have to use it a little bit different because your midpoint formula is your endpoints, right? Add your x's, cut it in half, and it should get you your midpoint. So -6 plus something, right? And then we cut it in half and got -1. So let's write that. -6 plus something, and we cut it in half, and we got -1. So let's work backwards. Instead of cutting it in half, we're going to multiply both sides by 2. All right, those will cancel. -6 plus x. And then -1 times 2 is -2. And then last step, add 6. So we got 6 minus 2 is 4. So our x coordinate is 4, which makes sense. -6 plus 4 is -2. Cut it in half, you get -1. So you have to use the midpoint formula a little backwards. For your y coordinate, same concept. -1 plus something, and then we cut it in half and got 1. -1 plus something, and we cut it in half, and we got 1 as our midpoint. So we're going to multiply both sides by 2. You kind of start off the same way every time. -1 plus y, 1 times 2 is 2. And then to solve, we're going to add 1 to both sides, and y equals 3. So there's our y coordinate. Again, you can always go back and check. Add your y's, cut it in half, you better get 1. -1 plus 3 is 2. Cut it in half, you get 1. So our coordinate is 4, 3. So it's a little bit different. Again, think about the midpoint formula. It's talking about your endpoints. You add your endpoints and cut it in half to get the midpoint. So if they give you the midpoint, you got to work a little bit backwards. Distance formula, we actually talked about this last week. This is the shell I use. Remember, put your x coordinates in one of them, put your y coordinates in the other. If you want the whole formula, it was the y2 minus y1, x2 minus x1. But you don't need all that. As long as you know that put your x coordinates in one of them, put your y coordinates in the other, you really don't need all that. You just need the shell. And what I'm going to use is I'm going to use the shell of the distance formula because it tends to be a lot easier to use. All right. So we're actually going to do the distance formula. We're going to do it two different ways here because that shell is stemming from Pythagorean theorem. So we're going to use the distance formula and we're going to use Pythagorean theorem and we're going to get the same exact answer both times. All right, so let's start with the distance formula. So let's do our shell. Something squared plus something squared equals something squared, right? A squared plus b squared. It's looking pretty familiar to the Pythagorean theorem, pretty similar. So remember, x coordinates go in one of them, y coordinates go in the other, doesn't matter which one's which. So my x coordinates are 3 and -3. So I'm going to say 3 and -3. And then my y coordinates are 2 and -1, 2 and -1. And we're going to do some math here. Remember, minus negative becomes plus, so 3 plus 3 is 6. 6 squared is 36. All right, 6 times 6. Minus negative becomes plus, so 2 plus 1 gets me 3. 3 squared is 9. And then you have square root of 45. And it doesn't say round or anything like that, so we're going to go ahead and type this one in the calculator. So we'll type in the calculator square root of 45 and we'll get about 6.7. Oh, it did say round. Sorry, to the nearest tenth. Good thing we rounded. All right, so now we're going to try it with graphing. So we have 3, 2. There's our point R. And S is -3, -1. Don't mind my drawing because it tends to be pretty ugly. And we've got a line. Now, you might say, Ms. Blake, how can we use Pythagorean theorem when there's no triangle? And you're correct, there's no triangle on here right now. But we're going to draw our own. So pick one of the points, and we're going to draw a triangle. We're going to go straight down, and then we're going to come straight across. So there's our right triangle. Again, the red wasn't there to begin with. But now I have a right triangle. This side is 1, 2, 3, very countable. This side is very countable as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 boxes. All right, count the boxes. And now we can set up our Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. So a squared plus b squared equals c squared, right? There's your Pythagorean theorem. Remember, c is always your hypotenuse, so across from the right angle is our hypotenuse. That's what we want. So we have 3 squared plus 6 squared equals c squared. 9, this should be looking familiar, 9 plus 36. All right, look at that, 36 and 9, we added them. And then your last step is we don't want c squared, we just want c, so we're going to take the square root. And it's the same, oops, just kidding, it's just a c now. And if you type that in, you still get about 6.7. So either way, distance formula is derived from the Pythagorean theorem. So if you forget distance formula, you can always graph it out and draw a triangle. Use Pythagorean theorem. There's your homework. Get it done. Make sure you show all of your work and upload when you're finished.